Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Marshall W. Allworth Planetarium. My name is Jessica. I am the director and will be your spooky star guide tonight. You've also met Brayden, one of our students who's helping out. And welcome to the first show of what we affectionately refer to as Spooktober. We love Halloween at the planetarium here. So our show tonight is Spooky Star Stories to Tell in the Dark. So it's constellation stories that have a bit more of a spooky twist to them. It's going to be a lot of fun. Now, if at any time during the show you need to leave, you're welcome to do so. You'll just exit through the same door you came in. Just, of course, be careful because it does get dark in here. That's all of the announcement stuff. So I'm going to head to the back and we'll get going. All right. So if we're going to be telling some spooky star stories tonight, I think we need to get the sky a little bit darker. So let's head on into our dark night skies. Now, the first story I have for you is about the night sky itself. And this story comes from Scandinavia. And it starts with the goddess Eden. Now, she lives with the other gods in Asgard, and she tended magical fruit of eternal youth, which the gods used to stay young and healthy. But one day, a giant kidnapped her and stole her magical fruit and brought both of them to the north. Now, without her and her fruit, the land became terribly cold, the gods began to grow old and frail, and afraid that they wouldn't survive, they decided to send Loki, the trickster god, and sent him to save the goddess and bring her and her fruit back. Well, Loki flew to the giant's palace disguised as a falcon. He then turned the goddess into a nut and grabbed her in his talons and flew back to Asgard. But as he did, the giant turned himself into an eagle and started to chase after them. Now, in Asgard, the gods were preparing for Loki to get back, and so they built this huge barrier of fuel and kindling around the city that they set on fire as soon as Loki got back. Now, the giant didn't have time to stop, and he flew straight into the wall of flames, which sent him up into embers, and those embers rose to the sky and became the stars that we see today. So our night sky is the remnants of a giant who flew into a firewall. Seemed like a pretty fun way to start our spooky star stories. All right, now on to some stars and constellations themselves. You may be familiar with one star in the north. That is, of course, our North Star, named Polaris. But according to Arabic mythology, Polaris is actually an evil star named Al-Qibla. He killed their great warrior, and so he was chained up into the sky so that he would stay there forever and be punished. So we have our evil star staring down at us. All right. Now, another one you may recognize is the big W in the sky. Now, this is traditionally in the planetarium, this is the Greek constellation of Cassiopeia. But that's not the story or the constellation I want to talk about tonight. Instead, I have two other interpretations. Now, for an Arabic constellation, instead of this being the queen, this is known as the tinted hand. And it belongs to a woman who was accused of stealing. And so to punish her, they chopped off her hand and threw it up into the night sky as a warning to anyone else. And so it's tinted red with the blood. Now, the other story comes from the Yakima, who see this as a great elk skin. And where we have the stars, you have holes in the elk skin. Now, this story starts with a family of 5 brothers. The 4 eldest brothers decided to go out hunting and left the youngest brother at home because they decided he was just too young to go out with them. Well, they're out trying to hunt, they're not having any luck, and they end up meeting this older man who they decide to ask for help. And he points them off because, yeah, I saw some elk over in that direction. And he pointed them off in a direction. What they didn't realize, though, was this man was an evil man. And he promptly turned himself into a giant elk and charged down the brothers, killing all 4 of them. Well, after a while, with the youngest brother at home, when he realized his brothers had been gone for a while, he started to get worried and went out searching for them. And he ended up coming across the same old man, and he asked them, hey, have you seen 4 older guys? My brothers were out here hunting. And the guy's like, yeah, I did. They went off that way. But the youngest brother notices that something just doesn't feel quite right. Something feels off about this guy. So he pretends to go off in the direction that the man had pointed him and instead hides in a bush. And he watches as the man turns himself into a giant elk and starts running towards the younger brother. And he realized that this man must have done this to his brothers and killed his brothers. So he jumped out from his hiding place in the bush and he shot the elk 5 times. 1 for each of his brothers and 1 for himself. And then he threw the elk skin up into the night sky. And there we have it hanging there with the stars being the holes where the arrows pierced the skin. All right. For our next view, we're going to turn ourselves over to the west. And we're going to start off, again, looking for some familiar Greek constellations and then telling some other stories around them. So, over in the west, there is a U-shaped group of stars. A little bit low in the west there. This is Corona Borealis. And sitting right next to it is the Greek constellation of Hercules. But to the Blackfoot, this U shape is the great spider god, and this is the web. Hercules is the web that the great spider god lives in. And it's said that once a year in the summer, the spider god climbs down to the earth to wreak havoc on the earth for a little while before making its way back up into the night sky. And I'm going to be honest, I include this one because I am terrified of spiders, and the thought of a giant one hanging over my head in the night sky absolutely creeps me out. All right. So one more over here in the west, which is one that we don't normally talk about. But there is a Greek constellation just below Hercules, more over in the kind of west-southwest. And this is Ophiuchus. Now, Ophiuchus has a gnarly story. So, Ophiuchus has another name, and I'm going to be honest, I struggle with the pronunciation of his name, so I'm just going to keep calling him Ophiuchus. But he was a king, and he decided to lead a group of men into this grove of trees to cut them all down. But this grove of trees was actually sacred to the god Demeter. So after Demeter learned what had happened, she cursed Ophiuchus with a hunger that would never be satisfied. And so he ate and he ate and he ate everything in his kingdom, and nothing made him feel better. He had a thirst that couldn't be quenched, and he drank everything that he could get his hands on, and nothing made it feel better. And eventually, he had spent all of his money and all of his resources just on food and wine and drink, trying to satiate this craving that would never go away. And once he ran out of money, he sold his wife and his kids into slavery to get more money, to buy more food and drink, and still nothing worked. One day, he's completely out of options. He has no more money, no more food. So he does something a little bit strange, but he starts to eat himself. But as he takes each bite of his own flesh, the hunger gets a little bit better. And he continues to eat more and more of himself, and he feels better and better. Now, when Demeter realized that Ophiuchus had found a way around this, she quickly worked to wrap a giant snake around him so that he couldn't eat any more of himself, and then chained him up in the night sky so that he would be imprisoned there and would have that constant hunger still be present, and be left to suffer up in the stars. And so there we see Ophiuchus chained up in the sky with the snake wrapped around him, stopping him from eating himself, which was the only cure that he had found for this constant hunger. It's a wicked one. All right. For our next batch, we are now going to turn ourselves over to the east. And we're going to start with a group of stars that's pretty high overhead. We have the Greek constellation of Lyra the Harp, right up overhead there. Now, normally during our star shows, we tell the second half of the Lyra story. But tonight, I want to tell the first half of it. So this Lyra, the harp or the lyre, was owned by a man named Orpheus. Now, Orpheus was married to Eurydice, and they were madly, deeply in love. Unfortunately, one day, Eurydice passes away, and Orpheus is determined to find a way to bring her back. So he sneaks down to the underworld. He uses his lyre, his harp, to play the dog Cerberus to sleep so that he can sneak in, and he confronts Hades and eventually convinces him to let his wife go. On a condition, though. The thing is, as they make their way out of the underworld, Hades told Orpheus that you cannot look behind you at your wife, because as soon as you do, our deal is off. And so they're slowly making their way back up. He keeps hearing noises, but he's doing good. He's not looking back. They're almost at the exit to the underworld when he hears her just gasp a little bit. And concerned and out of habit, he turns around real quick to check on her. And as soon as he does, that deal is broken, and he watches as his dear wife is dragged back down to the underworld, and he is left to leave back to Earth without her. It's sad. All right. Now a little bit more in the northeast. Let's just go ahead and turn it just a little bit there. Just underneath our Queen Cassiopeia, we have Perseus. This is another Greek constellation and a story that, again, we don't normally tell the start of during our normal star shows. So Perseus here, his mom was a princess. His grandfather is the king of Argus. And the king was told a prophecy that one day his grandson would kill him. And so he decides the best way to, keep this from happening is to make sure that his daughter never has any kids. Unfortunately, that plan fails, and she does end up getting pregnant and gives birth to Perseus. Well, the king, again, wanting to make sure that he doesn't get killed by this grandson that's been born, locks the two of them up in a crate and throws the crate out to sea. Eventually, the crate washes up on an island where the two are released by the farmers who live on the island, and they are able to stay there and they work on the farms to kind of, pay for their keep there. Now, once Perseus grows up, he realizes that some of the men in the village are, giving his mom a hard time. And so he stands up for her and tells them all to back down. And they kind of half joking are like, you know what? We'll back down as soon as you bring us the head of Medusa. Now, if you don't know, Medusa is a gorgon. So she's this creature. She's got a snake for hair. I believe in some depictions she's got like the body of a walrus. But she also has these special powers where if you look her in the eye, you're turned to stone. So obviously this makes her very difficult to defeat, and Perseus doesn't really have any, combat training. But he agrees and he says, yeah, you know what, I'll do it. I'm going to go get the head of Medusa and you're going to leave my mother alone. Well, some of the gods heard about what was going to happen and they decided to help Perseus out. So Athena gave him her polished shield. Ares gave him his sword. Hermes gave him his helmet that turned you invisible and also gave him Pegasus, the winged horse. So Perseus, now decked out, sets off, finds Medusa. In the middle of battle, he realizes the best way to defeat her is to use her power against her. And he takes that polished shield that Athena gave him and used it as a mirror, so that Medusa looked herself in the eye and turned herself to stone. And with that, he was able to chop off her head and fly back home. So when we see Perseus in the sky, we're actually seeing him right at the moment that he defeats her. And you actually can see that he is holding Medusa's head. Now, the star right here in Medusa's head is named Algol. And it is actually a reddish star. It does look red to the eye. And it is where our term ghoul comes from. It comes from the star Algol. And it's known by the Greeks and a lot of other cultures as kind of like the demon star, because not only is it red, but every couple days it almost blinks because it dims for a couple hours before coming back up to brightness. And then a couple days later, it blinks again. So it's this blinking red eye in the sky that's usually, again, associated with a demon or a monster of some sort. But the reason it blinks is because Algol is what we call an eclipsing binary star. So it's two stars. We're going to show a little depiction here. Two stars that from our point of view, we see them pass behind each other every couple days. And when one star passes behind the other, the light from that star is blocked. And so the star, as we see it, appears to dim. And that's what creates that red blinking demon eye of Medusa. All right. Back over to the east. And then we're going to go a little bit later into the night because the last few of my constellations are more winter constellations. We got to go a little bit later into the night because it's not quite winter yet. So let's go later into the night. Almost there. All right, we're going to stop it right about there. Turn ourselves a little bit more southeast. And we'll see our last few groups of stars and stories. Now, the first one we're going to start with is now pretty high overhead. It's near the foot of Perseus. And we have, where are you at? Sorry, trying to find my label real quick. There it is. We have the Pleiades right there. So in the Greek night sky, the Pleiades are the seven sisters. But to the Sierra, this is the Grizzly sisters. Now, the Grizzly sisters started out being really good friends with the Deer sisters. And the two of them would get together and play all day long. Until one day, Mama Bear, Mama Grizzly Bear ate Mama Deer. And that made the Deer sisters very scared of the Grizzly sisters. So they decided to trap them in a cave so that nothing like that would ever happen to them. And so there we have the Grizzly sisters trapped so that the Deer sisters feel safe, which, to be honest, I don't really blame the Deer sisters there. Just saying. All right. Now our next stop is a group of stars that you're probably familiar with. You probably know it as the Greek constellation of Orion the Hunter. But to the ancient Egyptians, the constellation of Orion was known as Osiris. Now, Osiris was killed by his brother Set, and his body was chopped up and thrown into crates and sent down the river Nile. And so what we actually see here in the sky is the body of Osiris as it's floating down the river Nile. And not too far behind, which we can't see her in entirety right now, but his wife is also a little bit lower. And she is desperately chasing after his body so that she can bring him home and give him a proper burial so that he can go safely into the afterlife. Because as of right now, he can't, because he hasn't had that proper burial. Now, speaking of this river that we see, this is our Milky Way galaxy, the galaxy that we live in. Now, it's full of about 200 billion stars. Most of those stars are too far away for us to see as nice little pinpoints of light. So instead, all of that light blurs together to give us this haziness. And it's shaped like a band that arches across our sky because our galaxy is shaped like a disk. And so those stars are all kind of concentrated in the disk, and so that's where we see the bulk of the light coming from. Now, to a lot of cultures, the Milky Way represented the road to the afterlife. And you had this as our kind of road that the spirits take. And this time of year was particularly important because since the road comes straight up and down, it makes it a lot easier for the spirits to pass back and forth between our world and the afterlife. Now, in some cultures, you also have some guardians that stick put. So for the Greeks, we actually have two dogs on either side of the Milky Way, and they both act as guardians. And there was kind of a trick to getting past them. You had to make sure that you were buried with enough treats so that you could give treats to the dogs so that they would let you pass. But you had to make sure that you had enough. Otherwise, the first dog would take all of them and there would be nothing left to give the second dog, and you'd be trapped right here, unable to complete your voyage. And like I said, we see lots of cultures that see this as the pathway of the spirits into the underworld. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our spooky star stories. We're going to let the night pass by and watch that road that the spirits take continue on until our sun comes up and brings us back into the safe daylight. And with that, I will bring our lights back up. And we have reached the end of our show. Thank you everyone so much for coming out. I hope you enjoyed those spooky star stories. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Before you head out, there are also some star charts sitting on the table in front of the TV at the entrance. Feel free to grab one of those so that you can find some of these stars and constellations we talked about yourself. We will also be passing out eclipse glasses for the eclipse next weekend. Grab a pair of those so that you can safely watch the solar eclipse next weekend. Again, thanks for coming and have a good week. Thank you. You got it. Okay.